This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 340, entitled The Masculists Feminists as Fools Strategy. Description. This flyer presents a strategy of the Masculists to make feminists look like fools, so as to help destroy the credibility of third-wave feminists as the much more humane alternative to having responsible masculist soldiers go out into the streets and simply shoot millions of feminazis to stop them indirectly wiping out whole populations due to their takeover of the hated, fluffy, feminist-dominated divorce court system, which financially massacres and destroys the lives of one father in 4, which then motivates 2/3 of young men in many Western countries to reject marriage and paternity, which wipes out whole populations. But these young men are merely reacting to the toxicity of the divorce courts. So it's the feminazis who are the indirect genociders, who have to be stopped, either with bullets or by having their isscienate, fairy, PC bullshit ideology destroyed, by destroying its credibility. This flyer lists the core ideas of the third-wave feminazis and then destroys them one by one with masculist science-based arguments as a contribution towards destroying the credibility of third-wave feminazism. The flyer itself. The Masculists Feminists as Fools Strategy by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer maps out a strategy to be used by masculists to help destroy the credibility, or the lack of it, of third-wave feminism, so that it is destroyed due to people, including former feminists, no longer believe in it, so that the more humane alternative, in brackets, to using bullets in a sex war to wipe out the feminazis, who have now become indirect genociders, wiping out whole populations due to their takeover of the divorce courts, and making them so toxic for men that in many Western countries 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, reject paternity, a huge issue, and spend their money on themselves, close brackets, is used instead. It's the feminazis, the third-wave feminists, who are out to increase women's power at men's expense, who don't care if they screw over men so long as women get more power, are now indirectly wiping out whole populations, so they have to be stopped. There are 2 main ways to do this. One is the more drastic, more violent way, and that is to physically destroy the third-wave feminazis themselves by killing them, shooting them in a sex war, where responsible men, masculist soldiers, go out into the streets and literally kill millions of feminazis. These responsible males will, in capital letters, not tolerate that these short-term thinking, amoral, 10% smaller-brained femalians wipe out whole populations. These masculist soldiers argue that it's better to wipe out a few million feminazis than to accept that billions of people get wiped out by not being replaced by a younger generation, due to the fact that the feminazis have made divorce, and hence marriage and paternity, so toxic for men that young men tell themselves, quote, "Fuck marriage, fuck paternity, I'm not going to marry, I'll have no kids, and I'll spend my money on myself. I refuse to be a manslave to some feminazi bitch, some fluffy parasite who pushes for equal rights for women, but hypocritically doesn't bother to fip up," that's in brackets, become a financially independent person, by bothering to get a career-competent education, to become a FIP as an adult, and then expects men to pay for her to have her kids, and after a decade of marriage will take her gullible manslave to the hated fluffy feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce court, and see him financially crucified in her favour, getting custody of his kids with 90% probability, getting his house that he paid for, forcing him to pay her child payments to kids he will barely see, and often alimony to his fluffy parasite ex-wife so that she can continue to parasite of him after the divorce, as she did before the divorce, and often for the rest of her life. Fuck that. Fuck fluffy parasites, or better still, that no man fucks them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, the hypocritical, parasitic, immoral, manslaving vermin that we young men won't go near, forcing them to grow up, woman up, fit up, forcing them to become adults, taking responsibility for their own lives, or pay a horrible price of being babyless, because no quality man is willing to give her his sperm. Such fluffy parasite feminazis are vermin to us, to be wiped out, killed, if there's no other way. Because as masculists, we see such fluffies as manslavers, as vile, to be exterminated, removed from the planet, the way slavers of Negroes were removed in the US Civil War. It took a war to remove Negro slavery in the US in the 1800s. Masculists today do not deny the possibility that it might take a sex war, killing millions of feminazis, to remove the world of man-slavery, forcing women to FIP up, to stop seeing men as sexploitable man-slaves, as women evolve to see men as... Women will have to adapt to the standards that masculists force on them, that is, to FIP up. Women will have to go against their own evolved expectations towards men, seeing men as sexploitable man-slaves who exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. The masculists put enormous moral pressure on women to FIP up, to pull their weight financially, to become emo FIPs, that is, having equal moral obligations to FIP up, who feel ashamed to be fluffy parasites, feeling that they have a moral obligation to FIP up. Otherwise, they will see themselves as fluffy, sexploitative vermin, agreeing with the masculists that such women are to be wiped out by being totally ignored by men, forced to rot on the shelf, to extinction, so that the only female genes left are much more FIP-oriented, a form of genetic filtering, enforced by the masculists, who have the financial power to force women to FIP up, because a woman can only be a fluffy, the opposite of a FIP, if she can get her financial claws into some gullible manslave. But the supply of such manslaves is drying up, as masculists and MGTOWs, in brackets, men going their own way, close brackets, tell millions of men via the internet not to marry, not to have kids, because if they are stupid enough to marry and have kids, then they play Russian roulette with their lives, facing a risk of 1 chance in 4 of being financially crucified in the hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce court system, and have their lives destroyed, which is such a massive discrimination against men that to the masculists it's a war issue, sufficiently motivating to cause responsible males, masculist soldiers, to go to war against the hated feminazis, killing them, to purge them from our populations, so that men get gender justice, so that marriage and paternity can become safe again for men, so that men are prepared to be fathers again, so that whole populations, in capital letters, are not wiped out! Exclamation. Ad-libbing here. I think that was the longest sentence I have ever written. Back to the flyer. This flyer argues that the more humane and initial alternative to the sex war mentioned above is to destroy the credibility of third-wave feminism, so that it is no longer believed in, so that the gender politicians are no longer brainwashed by a monoconscious feminism that preaches to them that men are evil, that men are toxic, who have to be punished, especially in the divorce courts. Women and gender politicians in particular need to be taught masculist ideas so that they learn that women oppress men too, TOO, and in fact far worse than vice versa, since women's oppression of men is so sustained, so deep, lasting decades. For example, women's financial parasitism of men, women's man-slavery, the fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, the red pill nature of women, parentheses, that is, not loving men but rather men's sexploitability, etc. Thus the masculist theorists now push for the destruction of third-wave feminism as the preferred method to solve the massive legal and social discriminations against men, who are treated as cash machines, to be robbed, to be abused, to be sexually discriminated against. For example, no paternity rejection right, when there is a maternity rejection right. The greatest example of sexual discrimination that exists, and it's not against women but against men. Obviously, it's much more humane to destroy the credibility of third-wave feminism so that the ideology dies out, so that it is no longer believed in, so that gender laws are much more easily men-fared to overcome the massive discriminations that currently exist against men due to the severe degree of monoconsciousness that exists in women, and particularly in the gender politicians who make the gender laws, which are so massively gender unjust towards men. So this flyer provides arguments for men and novice masculists to hurl back at feminazi bitches, forcing them to stop in their tracks as they are verbally, violently confronted by angry masculists who intellectually crush them with masculist arguments that are backed up by science, by reality, whereas so much of feminism is isscienate, fairly PC bullshit, fairy PC bullshit, more wishful thinking, more quasi-religious preaching than hard fact reality, making masculist ideas much stronger than feminist ideas, which is much less science-based. It is this level of issciency, that is, the inability to think scientifically due to ignorance of science, that is the Achilles heel of feminism, that the masculists can use to their considerable advantage, intellectually crushing the bullshit component of feminism by destroying it with contrary facts and ramming it home to the isscienate feminazis, giving them the clear message that the more they come out with their isscienate fairy PC bullshit, the more the masculist sages, that's intellectuals, will harangue them, blasting them out of the room with real ideological hatred, blasting them with expletives such as feminazi genociders, isscienate fairy PC bullshitters, misandrist amoral sadists, 10% smaller brain child minds, etc. The third-wave feminazis need to be taught the very clear message that their traditional monopoly of gender politics is over. Now that the masculists exist, men are moving into gender politics and hence will soon dominate it the way men always dominate everything. Because men are simply genetically superior to women, as shown by the scientific evidence, forcing women to accept that reality, and if they don't, then masculist scientists will dismiss them as fools, as feminazi fools, utterly discrediting them, making them lose face in public, killing the credibility of the feminazis' doctrine, causing it to die, to be wiped out by masculist science, which is reality-based, rather than the isscienate fairydom of feminist doctrine, which preaches, rather than teaches, women what they desperately want to hear, that is, that women are the equals of men, that women can do anything and can perform at the same level of men, and hence be given the same level of respect as men, etc. This flyer now lists in bulleted form the core beliefs of the feminists and then uses masculist science to refute them so that the doctrines of the feminazis lose credibility. Budding masculists need to study these refutations so that when they are confronted by feminazi issciency, they can harangue back at these feminazis, forcing them to give up their beliefs or face total ostracism by society, by men, and especially by young women, who are learning increasingly to hate the third-wave feminazis, because these young women see the feminazis as the root cause for why they are not having babies, because the quality young men refuse to give them their sperm, because young men reject paternity due to the toxicity of the divorce courts towards divorcing fathers as controlled by the hated feminazis. So these young women see that their babylessness is caused by the feminazis, so they hate the feminazis with a passion. Masculists need strongly to teach young women the above idea, that is, that their babylessness is due to the hated feminazis, so that young women combine with the masculists in their joint hatred against the feminazis, thus increasing the odds that feminazism gets wiped out due to total failure of its credibility. Here's a list in bulleted form of the core beliefs of the feminazis, followed by their masculist science-based refutations, provided as intellectual tools to be absorbed by budding masculists and by society in general, all aimed at killing off credibility of feminazism, so that a sex war can be avoided, so that society does not have to pay the price of the killing of millions of feminazis as the price to be paid for men to become willing again to become fathers, so that whole populations do not get wiped out. Here's the list off the top of my head. There are many such points that could be added, but the following are most of the main ones, and this flyer needs to be kept to a reasonable length. Core ideas of the feminazis. 1. Men should pay for the upkeep of children after a divorce. 2. Women are just as capable as men intellectually. 3. Women need to be... laws need to be... 3. Women should be respected as much as men in society. 4. Laws need to be changed so that women occupy half of the positions of power in the parliaments, in boardrooms, in professorships, etc. 5. Laws need to be brought in so that male condescension in the workplace can be removed. 6. Laws need to be passed so that the pay gap between the sexes is removed. 7. Women need to be judged by men for their personalities and abilities rather than their degree of visual sexual attractiveness. 8. Men need to be taught about their male privileges so that they give them up. I could go on, getting basic points from feminist texts, but the above is enough to make the point that so much of feminazi doctrine is literally unbelievable, irrational, non-scientific, non-real, that it should be seen as stupid, ignorant, foolish, so that society learns that so much of feminazism is foolish, so should not be believed in, so that it is not believed in, so that it dies out, the way belief in witchcraft or Negro slavery is no longer believed in, and hence died out. 1. Men should pay for the upkeep of children after a divorce. Women have the right to reject an unwanted pregnancy. It's called the abortion right. So that if she doesn't want the pregnancy to go ahead, she has the legal right to stop it, to abort it, so that her life is not screwed up by a child that she does not want. Men have no such right. There is no paternity rejection right, so that men are forced to pay for a child that he does not want. This sexual discrimination against men is the greatest example that exists. It's not against women, but against men, and screams out for reform. Millions of men have their lives ruined, made manslaves by women who lie to men about taking the pill, get pregnant, then force the man to pay for a kid he doesn't want. Women see men as manslavable cash machines to be sexploited by women, to pay for women to have babies. Fair enough if the father shares custody of the children after a divorce, that he pays equally with the ex-wife for the kids. But if he is denied custody, which is what happens in about 90% of custody decisions in many countries, then he should not be forced to pay, say the Masculists, because such a payment is to treat the man, the divorcing father, as a cash machine, to be abused, to be robbed, to strip him of his kids and expect him to pay for his fluffy parasite ex-wife with no moral nor legal obligations on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and to fit up, so that she pays for herself and does not continue to parasite off his labour, his money. Masculists have an utter hatred for fluffy manslavers and aim to wipe them out by killing them slowly, by forcing them to rot on the shelf, by being totally ignored by men, not even being pumped and dumped, forcing their fluffy bitch genes to be removed from the gene pool. 2. Women are just as capable as men intellectually. No, women are not, as shown by science. Women are dumber than men on average by 4 IQ points. That is, the average IQ of women is 4 IQ points lower than men's. YouTube Professor Rushton, that's R-U-S-H-T-O-N, or Professor Lynn, L-Y-N-N, on this, close brackets. And men's IQ variance, a measure of how spread out IQ scores are over a whole population, millions of people, is 10% larger than women's, so that the morons and the genii are male. Since the genii are male, it's not surprising that men have won 99% of the science Nobel Prizes, and women a piddly, pathetic 1%. The genii are males. Since the top performing people are males, it's to be expected that these elite males have a rather condescending attitude towards the inferior performance abilities of women, seeing them as rather child-minded, smaller-brained, seen more as walking cunts, baby machines and child raisers, rather than respect-worthy colleagues who can match their elite male abilities. Women have 10% smaller brains, with 10% fewer neurons, hence 10% less neural processing capacity than men. So it's not surprising that women don't invent much, create much, build much, being more parasites of men than equal contributors. Women are genetically inferior to men because women have been sexually selecting such men for 1 million years, using women's evolved hypergamous instinct. That is, sexually selecting superior men for their superior DNA for her kids, so that her kids have superior DNA than she does, which is good for the species, so evolved in Darwinian terms. Thus, the patriarchy is largely female-caused, since it is women who created these superior men, who dominate everything due to their superior male intelligence, their superior male motivation, due to their higher male testosterone levels, etc. 3. Women should be respected as much as men in society. Respect should be earned, not merely distributed as an individual right. Both sexes should be given equal opportunities to show their abilities and to use them, but there should be no quotas that force women and men to occupy equal numbers of positions of power, independently of abilities. Such a strategy would discriminate against men and would handicap society, since then the top jobs would not be going to the top people. See below for more on this. Since men outperform women in most things, all societies value boy babies more than girl babies, because they know from long experience that a boy baby is much more likely to grow up to become a highly valued member of the culture than a girl baby, who will grow up to become merely another baby factory and child raiser, which, although vital to ensure the survival of the tribe, is not status worthy, since, quote, any female can fucking raise kids. 4. Laws need to be changed. Quotas need to be brought in so that women occupy half the positions of power in the parliaments, in boardrooms, in professorships, etc. Masculists are hotly opposed to this dogma of the feminazis because such policies discriminate against men. Since males have superior abilities than females across the board, by imposing quotas, the top scoring males who are rejected from getting a power slot will have superior abilities than the bottom scoring females who do get a slot. This is blatant sexual discrimination against males and generates real anger from the masculists. It is also bad for society, since then the top slots are filled by non-top ability people, that is, the bottom scoring of the women who get slots. Such a society will perform less well than a society where the top slots are assigned purely on the basis of performance ability, which is largely genetically based. The masculists push for a policy of, quote, top jobs for the top people. Masculists push for the full implementation of equal rights for women in terms of second-wave feminism, that is, a meritocratic culture where slots are given to either sex based purely in terms of ability and not on the basis of sex. Since women are genetically inferior to men on average, a meritocratic system will have more men in power positions than women, and such a culture will function more efficiently than a feminazi quota system that has inferior ability females in positions of power, a system which would exclude superior performance males due to men's superior genetically based abilities. 5. Laws need to be brought in so that male condescension in the workplace can be removed. Men complain bitterly about the solipsistic nature of women, that is, women's inability to abstract, to place themselves in the shoes of men looking at women, and about women's inferior abilities compared to the elite males. Perhaps it is unrealistic of elite males to expect inferior females to be able to see the viewpoint of elite males when elite males are confronted with the inferior performance records and reasoning ability of females. Women just don't have the mental abilities to do that, simply because they are genetically inferior. For example, it's unrealistic to expect an average person with an IQ of 100 to understand the intellectual complexities of Einstein's general theory of relativity with its tensor calculus, its Riemannian geometry, etc. They just don't have the mental ability to get their heads around such intellectually difficult abstractions, nor could an average person well understand the extreme abstractions and difficulties of Kant's critique of pure reason, etc. What I'm saying here is that the condescension towards women's inferior performance and intellectual record is to be expected. These elite males are frustrated by the limitations of these inferior creatures, called femalians, by the limitations of these inferior creatures. So let fly from time to time their male impatience, expressed in the form of condescending remarks that express a genuine reality, that is, women's inferior intellectual record compared to men. But since women are simply dumber than men on average and with lower variance, women are simply intellectually too inferior to understand that condescension on the part of men. Trying to get women to see why men's condescension is justified would be as silly as humans getting frustrated at a dog's inability to understand calculus. Given women's inability to perform intellectually at elite male levels, it makes no sense to pass laws to ban male expression of condescension towards inferior women, because such condescension is based on reality, a reality that the elite males can see, but the dumber females cannot, because the females just don't have the brains to perform at elite male levels. Such legislation would be totally counterproductive, hitting up against a brick wall called reality, which stubbornly would not go away. You can't fight reality. 6. Laws need to be passed so that the pay gap between the sexes is removed. Feminazis keep harping about the pay gap. For example, women earn 80 cents to the male dollar. The feminazis, in their isscienate ignorance and intellectual inferiority, continue to not absorb the male and masculist refutations of the feminazi claim that the pay gap is due to male prejudice against women, that is, male bosses refusing to promote women to positions of responsibility and hence higher salaries. The main reasons for the pay gap are due to female life choices. Women prefer a healthier life-work balance, choosing to work less than men, so earn less. Women drop out of the workforce, often for a decade, to have kids, so become less qualified than men, so earn less. Women are genetically less capable than men, so don't attain the top, best paid positions than men. Women have lower testosterone levels than men, so are much less aggressive, less ambitious, less hungry to achieve at a high level. Women are less competitive, so achieve far less than men, so that men dominate the entries in the who's who books of great men, of great achievers. Male and female company bosses are reluctant to promote women to positions of real power and pay them high salaries because in their 30s, these high-flying women almost all drop out of the workforce to have babies. This is a classic phenomenon in law firms, for example, where on average young female lawyers earn more money than their male colleagues while in their 20s and early 30s, but then disappear to have kids. Investing a lot of money in a top female lawyer who will then disappear in a few years to have babies is not a wise investment. Both male and female bosses of legal firms agree on this basic common sense point. The fact that the feminazis have not absorbed and refuse to absorb the above arguments simply makes them look stupid